Well, we're still discussing electricity now, but we're right here in the studio with the Director, Strata Power Utility Nigeria Limited, Mr. Chukwuwani. Right here, Mr. Wani, good morning and thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So I'm sure you heard most of our conversation with Dr. Oswagi there. Alternatives seem to be the way now, but the issue of cost is still a deterrent. Can you think of ways that these can be handled?
Thank you very much. I think significantly I agree with the doctor. However, I have a little bit kind of alternative, which I think is going to be a mix between the solar and also the state grid. Because with the new law empowering the state to develop support in terms of power development and all that, most of the states now are looking at creating a state grid, which will now be able to deliver more power through the state grid infrastructure directly to the sub-disco infrastructure. So for me, why solar appears to be a very good alternative, but we should be able to create a mix, because solar in itself is a peaking plant, not a base load, meaning it supports already the existing generation. Because if you want to make it a base load, it means you have to invest in battery, and you know battery is very expensive. So, but if basically on the panel, which you know during the day you're able to generate and also distribute, then you have a state grid in terms of generating through other sources like gas, supporting that solar system. Then you're able to reach out beyond within the town to the villages. So with
but sorry, so I don't lose what you just said. You're saying that the panel can be used without batteries, because I thought that power is collected through the panel and stored in the battery for whenever you want to use it. And we know the issue with batteries. They're the most expensive, it's imported, and you know the power life is something else. So can the use of battery be eliminated in the use of solar electricity?
Yes, absolutely. You know, during the day, the sunlight directly generates the power through the panel, and you can be able to consume directly and then store part of that power.
Where do you store it?
You store it in the storage. That's the battery.
Exactly.
So that the essence is to use it later on when there are when there is no sunlight. Mm-hmm. Now, if you're able to generate directly and use during the day, then at night, and you have from the grid or from the local grid, you are able to have the cost in terms of the initial capex for the panel is low compared to the battery.
So what if supply, because we don't control supply, individuals don't control supply. So what if the supply comes, you know, during the day when you also have your solar? Then, I mean, it defeats the purpose.
Yeah, during the day, because you have already procured the solar. Our market is not mature now. Had it been our market is mature, during the day, when you are generating excess, you can actually sell to the state grid, so that at night, you can net off from what you have sold to the state grid. So some of us, what we are projecting, because we have been talking with a couple of state governments, I said, look, they say now you've been giving powers to fashion out your own electricity markets. They say need to develop your state grid, such you don't depend fully on the national grid. Meaning that you could set up various embedded generations within several locations in the state, which can feed into that state grid. The grid becomes like one grid that supports the entire state, such that more investors can come in. You have different players generating from different locations, feed it into your state grid. Your state grid now supports the local distribution network, which feeds the customer the last mile. All right. So with that, you're also able to support with the solar at major other rural areas, and be able to have because price is usually an issue. And when you don't get the pricing right, of course, the customer tends to complain. So our view is that now that the state have been given the powers, they need to invest more on the state grid and support the national grid, because we know that the national grid cannot have enough to feed the supplies.
So this state grid now is supposed to have contribution from private, independent power mostly, not individuals. Because we know, I know, I've had this conversation a couple of times where they said that the power that we generate in Lagos from generators is enough to power the whole of Nigeria, but because it's not coordinated, I think we may also have to apply that to even solar, because you see a lot of panels on homes at this time, but it's not coordinated. So that's also another thing. So are you saying that all of these can be channeled into the state grid and then it will be more coordinated? But how do we achieve that?
Absolutely. Of course, this is through the continuous policy process. Because now that the state have been given powers, they are going to be, and most of them have set up their own regulator. Those several policies are going to be put in place in terms of how do we galvanize all these generations from different spots, and where are they going to be the feeding points into this grid. So with that kind of the designing the market, you could see different players, even those who generate for themselves, able to even sell to that state grid. So you could now have, to the extent that you may even have an excess power. Because if I'm generating enough for myself, and I have more power to deliver to the grid, you that is not generating, you could be able to take power from that. So it's going to be a policy process through the State Electricity Regulatory Commission, which I know most of the states have currently in place. So with that, I believe that that could be able to create that synergy between those who want to invest in generation and those who want to invest in the last mile. Because you see, these are segments. There are those who is also interested in investing, even in the state grid. There are those who are interested in investing in various generations, such that the state grid becomes like an open access. Open access means that anybody could generate, put in power. This power is measured from the point of putting it into the state grid. Then there are other players in terms of the last mile distributors to customers who now take this power from various points and now do the last mile. So I believe that a couple of states are already looking in that directions and creating different segments of market to make this power available.
It sounds like a very technical process. And it's going to need very technical and skillful individuals. Maybe because I'm standing on the outside, perhaps for you it's not. But I hear you talk a whole lot about policy. So policy on the one hand, the infrastructure is also another, because if we're going to have a feeding point into the state grid and all of that, I don't think we have that already, or do we?
Of course not, but I'm aware that a lot of states are already looking into that direction. So I can talk of Ogun State. I know His Excellency and the essay to the governor on power, it's part of the priority, because they believe that Ogun State has so much sources that energy can be generated and injected into that point. So they are already creating a kind of a market structure with different players coming in. So of course, is the policy that will be able to incentivize the private investors to come into.
What kind of policy do you think can give enough incentive to drive private sector investment?
Okay, one of the policies is like in terms of what we call an open access. If there is a state grid has enough incentive in terms of the transmission cost, meaning a good number of costs, maybe like between 12, 18 naira for transmission on the line. A lot of investors who are willing to invest on that trust because they are looking at it as a long-term, 20 to 30 years investment, meaning that powers collected from various sources has to go through that grid. And for every power going through that grid, as an investor, you are making money. Now the guy and the last mile delivery, it's very happy that, look, there is a guarantee in terms of this power to be on this grid. And then we're also able to guarantee our customers that at all time you have power. So at each of the value chain, we'll be able to support each other to ensure that you are meeting each of the obligations.
So let's not forget that we're in Nigeria and we're still dealing with Nigerians. So whether it is a state grid or a national grid, there are common issues around it, which is why in a similar conversation that I had, someone talked about the government giving a kind of insurance. If, for instance, as an investor, my income, my revenue is threatened, can the government come in and give some kind of insurance if customers do not pay or delay to pay and all of that? Can the government give some kind of insurance to ensure that even though the consumers are not doing what they ought to be doing at some point, or there is a disaster that causes, that I will still be in business and I can still survive?
Well, for me, I think that will be like taking us backwards, because we've been in this situation before when the power was privatized, and we have various government support in terms of subsidies and all that, and we've seen that it has never worked. For us, I think what we work is in terms of policy consistency. If you say, okay, there's no energy theft, we want to stop energy theft, and there are issues on energy theft or non-paying bills and all that, and an investor wants to disconnect a customer, you need to support that investor to do that. Because I believe that if government comes in, keep putting in money, keep putting those incentives, even in terms of people develop confidence, investors' confidence in making further investment, will not be there, because be rest assured that most times government defaults in making some of this payment, and it keeps accumulating. For me, I think that we need to be able to implement any policy we have in place. Today we talk about meter bypass, and you discover that, like some of us who are players, I have businesses, I have also run a distribution company. You report that, my meter has been tampered and all that. Our staff were at fault. You discover that there are no mechanism to be able to help you to enforce that. So at the end of the day, you become more powerless. You keep managing, and if that keep going, the incentive for you to keep investing is not there.
So which is why this individual is asking that government ought to come in there. I mean, the issue of power theft and non-payment of dues, as you said, as a player, you a lot of time become powerless. And the individual, the consumer, is still there doing what they're doing, even when you know that they're doing something wrong. You can hardly do anything about it.
That's why I would say that the government needs to implement, if they agree that power theft attracts certain sanctions, government or the instrument of government, that they'll be used to enforce that. Because as a private person, I don't have that instrument to enforce that, but I can leverage on various government institutions, like the police, like possibly I think they're setting up some power theft tribunals and the rest, to be able to enforce that. So those supports has to be there. Government needs to provide those supports. Government needs to ensure that if I report that my staff have been fought by a customer because wanted to disconnect, certain steps have to be taken.
Doesn't matter whether it's a government agency, ministry, or is a very rich man in the country or a politician. These are the realities.
Exactly, and that's what we've been going through. In fact, today, if you look into the market, you discover that the MDAs are possibly the highest debtors in the market, and they contribute over 60% of revenue losses.
So now, how do you fight the government with a government instrument? Because the MDAs are government and they are owing. So what do you do about them?
So these are where I think the government needs to be able to put up some structure. I mean, using maybe like the Office of the Accountant General or the CBN, and where some of this payment can be paid from the source. So you don't need to go to those institutions in order to start getting it, because basically you may not be able to get your money. So I think we need to have a kind of a discussion where government put in place some kind of settlement arrangement using the Central Bank of Nigeria as the settlement house to be able to settle those debts, because those debts contribute so much in terms of why the market is not properly functioning or why the market is dysfunctional.
So that's why I said, whether it's the state grid or a national grid, these are the issues that have kept the sector, the electricity sector, down. So if they're not dealt with, whether it's the state or the federal, we will still go back to the same issue.
Yes, I agree absolutely. And that's why I think with the state grid, now, and of course the state knowing that, look, if there are shortfall, who take responsibility? There needs to be a kind of conversation between the state and federal government. For every federal government facility or state government facility, someone has to take responsibility. Like the state government facility, of course, the state governor through maybe the accountant general of the state, we need to be able to find a way to those payments has to be made, either deducted from the ministry's allocation. Then for the federal government, especially where you have military facilities, I think because we all know what happened recently in terms of one of the discos trying to recover some of their payments. So I think they need to be that kind of a structure where the federal government needs to work with the CBN. And part of the funding going to some of these agencies can be set aside for the payment of their bills.
Now, paying from source.
Paying from source, exactly.
All right, but assuming that all of this works out, we pray it works out, what happens to the existing discos and what happens to the national grid?
See, the existing discos and national grids are still very, very fundamental in terms of the power delivery. Because the fact that the state government are now able to manage does not mean that they cannot no longer rely on the grid. However, the grid just provide like kind of support in terms of if you don't have enough, you can also take from the grid. Because basically, the way the infrastructure is designed is that there is the grid has a 330 and 132 substation. The local grid has 33 substations and 11 substations. So basically, there could be a co-location between that. There's already a co-location between that 132 and 33. So the state grid can go directly to the 33, and the national grid comes from the 132 down to 33. So from that interface, if there is enough power from the state grid, of course, you may not need to take from the national grid. But if there are not enough power from the state grid, then
the states will pay the national grid for supply.
There's going to be a reconciliation of what actually coming from the national grid and what comes from the state grid. That's how that settlement arrangement is.
And the funding, I'm trying to understand how the funding will be for the national grid.
No, for the national grid, those infrastructures are already there. It's just in terms of reinforcing them, adding additional substations that will enable them to take more power. Those infrastructures, it's the state grid that their infrastructures are not yet there, which is very good now that they are now developing it from the scratch. So they are going to design a grid that is very reliable, that is able to deliver power on a 24 basis. And I'm telling you this because we are doing it, and we've been doing it since 2021. We've never had a downtime along this axis.
Yeah, but the thing is, one thing we've come to see with our infrastructure is maintenance. Are we having that as part of the plan? Because even with the national grid now, grid is collapsed, grid is mostly because of the age. It's aged, it's been there for decades and all of that. So do we have that, the maintenance of it, as part of the plan at this initial time? I'm talking about the state grid now.
Of course, and when you talk about the issue of maintenance is all about funding. If the incentives are there and we have the right numbers in terms of tariffing for that state grid, definitely maintenance is part of the KPIs, whoever is managing that state grids, in terms of ensuring that part of the revenue coming in from the transmission is reinvested into maintaining that grid. And because this grid is being built brand new, it's still going to take a long time before you start having the kind of issues we are having today.
Yeah, but let's walk against it from one side. But thank you so much for this very technical conversation. Director, Strata Power Utility Nigeria Limited, Mr. Chuks Wani.
Thank you.